Hi, everybody. It's Tuesday, March 22nd. This is the fourth of 5, Awakening from Grief, Finding Our Way Back to Joy, Processing Grief. I've referred to several books during the time, including Awakening from Grief, the book by John Welshons that opened our series, and his latest book called When Prayers Are Unanswered. And then I've been referencing the last few weeks, including on the plane ride down here to where I am in Miami, the Grief Recovery Handbook. And it's been extremely helpful to me, particularly in looking at the myths. This is by John James and Russell Friedman. I'll put it in the chat again. And then they also did this book, When Children Grieve. And I can tell you from my experience, it's nothing children's grief. It was about how to be with your own grief. And that's the bottom line, the best I can tell. And I don't want to be arrogant enough to interpret the authors, but my takeaway from it was you can assist children in their grief by dealing with your own grief. And to the degree that you do a better job with your own grief and undoing some of these myths of grief, we're not going to pass that on to the children. Like, go to your room if you can't be happy, don't feel anything, don't be sad, don't be mad, don't have emotion, suck it up, don't worry, I'll get you a new dog on Saturday. Replacing losses, be strong no matter what, be strong for mama, be strong for your brothers and sisters, don't be weak. And so think about that as we start tonight. Like, what were some of the messages you got regarding bad feelings? When you had feelings that the world calls bad feelings or negative feelings, what were some of the messages you had about that as a kid? And write them down or put them in the chat, anything you can do with them. Just let us see them or keep them there for yourself. But just spend a minute, literally a minute, in reflection with just what you're dealing with, what's in the underground of your emotional heart and mind. You're the strong one. My family said it. Now pull yourself together. Get yourself together. Tomorrow's another day. Don't look back. Look ahead. I think I've told you, like one of the questions I wrote for another group that I'm serving was, what are the known psychological effects of these messages like this? And even like the mystery of it, like my Aunt Martha, who is my namesake. So she was like the mother to me. So my mother had me, her first baby, went right back to work as soon as she could get back to work in just a few weeks. Not even like a 6 or 8 week time period, just as quick as she was able, she got back to work because we had to have the money. So she went right back to work. So my Aunt Martha lived in the house and took care of me. So then they eventually, then she and my grandmother both lived in the house with us. And I was close to my Aunt Martha and learned a lot from her. And she was a very silent service, working hard, no complaints, nothing like that. The opposite of my grandmother, who was like queen bee in the house, and the world revolved around her and my grandmother, even to the point of like the temperature in the room, how hot or cold it was, what we ate, the temperature of the food, the volume level on the TV, what was on the TV, like the entire environment was around her. My Aunt Martha demonstrated no need, not a need for anything, not a want for anything. And she also had what I consider to be superpowers. So if a bee flew in the car, for example, and other people were freaking out and, oh, it's a bee, she'd be like, she'd reach and pick up the bee, put it out the window. So she had a lot of appeal to me because whatever she knew, I wanted to know. Whatever she was doing, I wanted to be able to do that. And without fuss, without dramatics, without things like that I was seeing coming from the other kind of loud, crazier stuff that was going on in the house, and the angst and the fussing and the yelling and the fighting and the blaming and the shaming and the what are we not going to make it till Friday and things like that. So she died when I was 14, and I was an athlete and the star of the softball team. And we were headed out of our high school down off the hill to the softball field. La, 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 la. It's a great day in the neighborhood. And my cousin came around the corner and said, "Did you hear that Aunt Martha died?" And I fainted. No thought, no known emotion, no known anything. Just Martha on the ground. So whatever connection there was is not to be understood from the physical maybe. Now, if you had shown me a clip of my life and said, "You'll have a reaction like this when she dies," I wouldn't have believed it. Because I liked her, loved her, felt close to her, but I wasn't aware of the symbiotic heartstring, whatever was going on between us. I wasn't aware of just how strong that was. I later read, years later, that when Loretta Lynn's child, a half-grown son, died, she went into a coma and was in a coma for days, all through the wake and the burial and all that. So it's like he was in another state, half dead. Like, so what are the effects? Just how deep does this run? How deep do these losses run, and this grief that we feel, and the power of a heart that would have this, that has the wiring to know when it's overwhelming, when it's too big, that it will shut itself down, that it would short circuit, just like an electricity would throw, a transformer would throw a breaker and break it down. Like our bodies have got something, our psyche, psychological, mental, emotional wiring's got something in there that'll say, this is too much for this, and it's shutting down also. So think about anything like that that you could relate to. And Jerry, I'm glad you made it on, honey. So I'll turn the floor over to Jerry in a little bit and introduce him. Welcome to those of you I didn't get to call your name as you came on, Elise and Lisa and Carol and Peggy and anybody else. It's just awesome that you're here. Awesome that you're here. So just have the words and let the words do whatever they can. And see it if you're willing, and if you're willing to do it, and if you're willing to do it, then do it. If you're not willing and can't, then notice that too. How willing are you for heartbreak? And what's your experience of heartbreak? What do you know about heartbreak? Not from theory, not from a book, but from your own direct experience. What do you know about heartbreak? Heartbreak is unpreventable. The natural outcome of caring for people and things, caring for people and things over which we have no control. of holding in our affections those who inevitably move beyond our line of sight. Heartbreak begins the moment we are asked to let go and cannot. In other words, it colors and inhabits and magnifies each and every day. Heartbreak is not a visitation, but a path that human beings follow through even the most average life. Heartbreak is an indication of our sincerity. In a love relationship, in a life's work, in trying to learn a musical instrument, in the attempt to shape a better, more generous self. Heartbreak is the beautifully helpless side of love and affection, and is just as much an essence and emblem of care as the spiritual athlete's quick but abstract ability to let go. Heartbreak has its own way of inhabiting time and its own beautiful and trying patience in coming and going. Heartbreak is how we mature. Heartbreak is how we mature, yet we use the word heartbreak as if it only occurs when things have gone wrong. An unrequited love, a shattered dream, a child lost before their time. Heartbreak, we hope, is something we hope we can avoid. We hope. Something we hope we can avoid. Something to guard against, a chasm to be carefully looked for and then walked around. The hope is to find a way to place our feet where the elemental forces of life will keep us in the manner to which we want to be accustomed, and which will keep us from the losses that all other human beings have experienced without exception since the beginning of time. Heartbreak may be the very essence of being human, of being on the journey from here to there, and of coming to care deeply for whatever we find along the way. If heartbreak is inevitable and inescapable, it might be asking us to look carefully for it. It may be asking us to make friends with it, to see it as a constant and instructive companion. And strangely, perhaps, in the depths of its impact, as well as in its hindsight, to see that it actually has its own reward. Heartbreak asks us not to look for an alternative path, because there is no alternative path. It is a deeper introduction to what we love and what we have loved. An inescapable and often beautiful question. Something or someone who has been with us all along, asking us always to be ready to let go. From David White in a book called Consolations, entitled Heartbreak. So I encourage you to be with yourself, your own heart, as you heard that. And see what commitments you can make to shift around this, including turning some of these myths around and some of these messages to be less afraid of heartbreak, even dare say accepting of it, at least including it, that it could be part of my experience here, or it has well been part of my experience here. So let's see where we can go. So Reverend Dr. Jerry Troyer's with us tonight. He has got some experience of heartbreak, not theoretical, like the other presenters that's been here with us the last several weeks. I've asked him specifically, and it was his guidance too, to look at anger specifically. And he'll speak about the anger that he has that was part of his, is and has been part of his grieving process. So you might begin to see how anger has been a companion to you during loss and change and death and loss of familiarity. And I can tell you that the deepest rage I've ever had yet, enraged, outraged, rage, anger, mad, frustrated, irritated, let down, put out, has been at life itself, God, and God's ineptness, and who dies and who lives. And my naive little 3-year-old heart thinking somebody ought to be consulting somebody here so that you can take some of these knuckleheads out of here and leave the good people. So I can relate in so many ways. So Jerry, thank you, honey, for being here. So speak to us, honey, about your experience and anything that you'd want to bring forth here as we move through our losses and witness that in others.
Martha, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share and for the willingness to talk about what we don't talk about, which is just so incredibly important. Greetings, everybody. It's great to be with you today. So my story is, well, let me start again. We talked before about what we were taught about grieving and those negative feelings and those bad feelings and all of that, and how many of us were encouraged by our families to avoid that, to squash that, to leave it, hide it under the bed, just don't talk about it. And I would suggest those of us in New Thought that perhaps our spiritual communities have encouraged us to do the very same thing. You might have heard expressions like, don't worry, be happy, good vibes only, never give up, stop being so negative. And you might have also heard the terms toxic positivity and spiritual bypass. And as a result of the experience that I'm going to share with you in just a moment, I've done some research and really dove into this next piece of my ministry, which has to do with allowing ourselves to feel what we feel. My story is that my husband and I were together for 33 years, and he made his transition He died. That's what he did. Can we say the D word? He died on the way home from Unity Village in the airport in Houston. He had been going through chemotherapy for colon cancer, and the chemo was doing wonderful things for the tumors, but terrible things for him. So to his physical body. So we were at an Anson affiliated New Thought Network conference at Unity Village, and he was getting weaker and weaker and having a lot of problems, even just walking. So we left a day early and flew Kansas City to Houston. And on the layover in the airport in Houston, his heart stopped. So called the paramedics, took him to the hospital. They were able to revive him once, and then he died, and they were not able to revive him. So this Thursday morning in 2018, I'm in Houston by myself and making phone calls and arranging to get all the luggage home. And I arrive home with 4 suitcases, because 2 of mine, 2 of his, and by myself except for the dog. And I begin to grieve. And I begin to have those feelings that we have. And my ego said, no, you are a religious science minister and practitioner. All is well. Everything is in divine order. It is what it should be. And I have to tell you that I've battled with myself for a few days, because I really need to begin the grieving process, but my ego is fighting with me because you shouldn't, one of my favorite words, you shouldn't have those feelings. So what I found was that it was so important for me to allow myself to get away from the toxic positivity, get away from the spiritual bypass, and allow myself to feel what I feel. And I've created a workshop based on this concept of allowing ourselves to be at home in the muddy water. I don't know about you, but when I first started in this teaching, I got the impression that, well, now that we're in New Thought, everything's going to be wonderful. We'll have enough money, we'll have physical health, everybody will behave themselves, nobody's going to die, everything is going to be exactly as it should be. And I don't know about you, but it ain't necessarily so. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So when I do my workshop in person, I always take my magic wand with me. Because how often do we try to do the magic wand thing and cover our grief about the loss of a dear one, or the loss of a pet, or the loss of a job, or grief as a result of anything in our lives that didn't come out the way we expected them to? How often do we wave the magic wand and just gloss over whatever it is and say, well, there's someone better out there for you? Well, there may very well be, but I'm still grieving this experience. We were always taught growing up that anger is not allowed. And that, I don't know, I'm sure there's something in the Bible, a soft answer turneth away wrath, and a couple of other things. And so you just don't, we were encouraged very much to never show emotion anyway, and certainly not anger or grief or anything like that. And what I found, and it's been about 3.5 years, and in this grieving process, as you know, you don't wave the magic wand and get past it. It is absolutely a process, not an event, with no necessary expiration date. And 3.5 years later, I'm doing really well. I'm in an amazing new relationship. My life is really good. And then I'll hear a song, or I'll have a thought, or whatever the case might be, and I'll have that few moments of grief all over again, and those few moments of anger. My husband was a registered nurse for 32 years, and when he turned 50, he started getting the home colon cancer screening tests. And so when he turned 50, he got the envelope in the mail, and I said, there you go. And he said, yes, I'll have to do that. And then when he turned 51, he got one in the mail, and I said, there you go. And he said, yes, I'll have to do that. And same thing when he was 52, and then he was 53, and he started losing weight, kind of unexplained. And as you may know, that's one of the telltale signs of cancer is unexplained weight loss. And so he finally went to the doctor, and by that time it was stage 4. And again, went through the process and did really well with the chemo, but his body didn't. So every once in a while, I have the feelings of, if you just would have taken care of yourself, and if you just would have talked about it, because that was the other thing. And I think he didn't want to scare me and didn't want to give me more grief before I absolutely had to have it. And ideally believed that there was a way that he was going to recover from this. And so we never talked about what if. And we never talked about, let's see, that's 8 years before his death. He went through a period of drug addiction and made a great big mess. And we never talked about that. And so my anger and my feeling of loss is not only why weren't we able to clear these things out, but why weren't you able to talk to me about this? So there's the need for forgiveness. Whenever I do a memorial service, I like to talk about forgiveness, because how often do we need to, when we're ready, and again, not using the magic wand, but when we're ready, forgive that person for dying before we were ready for them to go, but also for any unfinished business that they took with them. That forgiveness piece, and I'm a staff minister for a CSL congregation in San Diego, and I talked about forgiveness a couple of weeks ago, and those of you who are pulpit ministers, you know what a great joy it is when you start to cry. And so I'm talking, and away we go, and I start to tear up, and what I figured out was, I'm not done yet. I am not done with this need for forgiveness yet. And that's okay. It's not only is it okay, but it's necessary for us to feel what we feel, to not cover up these heartbreaking experiences in our lives with discounting that, oh, your loss, and I think Reverend Ali talked about this last week, that your loss is so much greater than mine, so I shouldn't be complaining at all. A friend of mine said, well, you had 33 years together, you should be grateful for that. And I said, yes, I am, but I wanted more. Do we allow ourselves to feel these feelings, to not cover them up with this spiritual bypass? You might have heard that expression, and one of the books I use for the workshop is, you probably can't read that, Spiritual Bypassing When Spirituality Disconnects Us from What Really Matters, by Robert Masters. And he talks about spiritual bypass as being avoidance in holy drag. And that really cracks me up. So I believe that in New Thought, and that includes religious science and unity and divine science and all the family members, for us to remain pertinent, we have to meet our dear ones, starting with ourselves, where we are. And if I come in heartbroken and you tell me that to see the good in everything, to stop being so negative, and cover it all up with just positive platitudes, that's not meeting the person's needs. We'll get them there, but we need to meet them where they are. So anger is just the most interesting thing. I find that, and don't tell anybody, but I find that I'm charming and sparkling most of the time. But if the inanimate object doesn't work for me, or something happens not as I would have preferred, that's really close there for me to get really angry. And of course, as we know, where does road rage come from? It's anger that's not been expressed. What happened to that pint of Ben and Jerry's? What happened to that package of lemon Oreos? It's anger, it's grief that's not been expressed that we're expressing in other ways. How important it is for us to talk about what we don't talk about so that we can live these wholehearted lives. Debbie Ford, one of my favorite authors, said, "What we can't be with won't let us be." One of the other things I do in the workshop is I have a sheet of paper with 3 buckets, pictures of 3 buckets, and we list our bad emotions on the first bucket and our good emotions on the second bucket, and we draw pipes going from the bad emotions and the good emotions down to the third bucket. And the third bucket is labeled emotions. So the anger, the rage, the depression, all of those emotions that we've labeled as bad, what if we didn't and just said, I'm feeling really honked off today. Interesting. Observe it, deal with it as we're able to, and move forward rather than calling it negative or bad. So that's my story.
Well, that's saying, Jerry, that changes all of it, to the degree that we are willing to have emotion and take down the labels of what's bad, which is all tied into the messaging we got as children with bad emotions are not welcome here. Sadness is not welcome. Madness is not welcome. Get yourself together, go to your room. You can't be out here until you can be out here and happy, 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 or at a minimum, be out here neutral. Be out here well together.
Right.
And it's that's the same kind of link that's tied to this, that if we do nothing through this but this, and part of tonight is to start to look at, as we come up on the closing of this particular sessions of this, to begin to think, what practical things can I do that's going to make a difference? And it would be then to do the opposite of some of these things. So if I've not been a crier, if I won't allow myself to cry, then I'm going to allow myself to cry. And then I'm going to do things that would even prompt my crying. Like you heard me say, and some of you have said music. I played a piece of music last week that prompted crying for some of us. So then who can cry, those of us who can cry, are also crying for the soul of humanity. The people there that can't cry, that's still bound up in this, it doesn't have the same capacity for that. So if there's such a thing as we can then share some of that burden without burdening ourselves, that we can funnel some of that burden through our own crying. So then it would be then, instead of trying not to feel bad, I'm going to be willing to feel bad. I'm going to be willing to let whatever I feel have a place, and to stop lying about it, falsifying it, pretending, posturing through it, or something like that. And this notion that we can replace the loss, like Jerry's dead as he's going to be, which is what I heard my mother say once about somebody in grief. She said, I just can't get that. He's as dead as he's ever going to be. Just why wouldn't you just go on with your own life? Like, he's not coming back. And it sounds so practical. That sounds so practical. Yeah, that sounds practical. He is as dead as he's ever going to be. But this notion that whoever's next for me is going to replace the loss that I had of him, it's like, no. And that I'm working with a ministry and somebody's retiring. And I said, the loss that you feel around this retiring minister is not going to be replaced by this new one you're coming in on, that you're coming in with either. And it's like, as children, it was our puppies, or I had this one little doll that I loved. I only had one single doll my whole life. And I loved this doll. And I lugged her around, and I was mowing grass, 5 or 6 years old, mowing grass with a push mower. And I put her by the tree, and the neighbor's dog got her while I was mowing grass. And I cried. And cried. And my mother had never seen me cry that I know of. She may have heard me cry in my own room, but she had never really seen me cry. So then it's like, what in the world? Like, God Almighty, it was a toy. It was a doll. It was like, and then the neighbors felt awful. So they went and got me a new doll, and probably an expensive new doll, knowing them. And it's like, I didn't want that dumb doll because it wasn't my doll. So this notion that losses can be replaced like this, that there's another person or another job or another profession, instead of like the loss is the loss. Like, and it's that grief is 100%, regardless of if it's a pet, a profession, a breast. I remember people saying, at least you caused your breast cancer at an early stage, and it's like, remember last week, there's nothing empathetic that starts with at least. One of you sent me an email. Yes. Now, wait a minute. Whoa, because I'm using at least a lot, and it's part of my gratitude practice. So I'll see if I can speak a little bit about it. But the difference to me is when we're trying to get ourselves not to feel something, then it's like, well, I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to go to bed sad every night. So I'm going to like look back on the day and say, okay, what can I be grateful for? So the example is, I was frustrated last night. My water was still not fixed. And I said to myself, getting into bed, well, at least you have a warm bed. At least you're safe. Then I caught myself, and then I felt confused. Because how is it that at least is not an expression of gratitude? So there's something, I'm grateful there. And for me, it's like our inability to let both of them reside. That I'm frustrated, disappointed, sad, and tired, weary over not having the water and not having the water fixed. And to let that have its place. And it can coexist with, I'm also grateful that somebody brought me water over. I'm grateful that I found a way to get around the water not being fixed. I'm grateful that I have a bed. I'm grateful I can go to sleep tonight. I'm grateful. So it's both and to me, not one or the other. So,
and that's such a huge point. Pardon me for interrupting, but I just want to say that's such a huge point, because we can be both. Yes. We don't have to be, as spiritual beings, We don't have to be charming and sparkling all the time. We can be frustrated. We can be angry. We can feel those feelings. And yes, I'm grateful for this, but that has nothing to do with that. So we really can be, and Trish, thank you. We can laugh while we're crying and feel both. Yes.
And we do. It's just a matter of we may not have to have shame over it. Like when my mother died, I had, at that moment when when the breath left her, so to speak, I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. I felt relief. And then I would get to thinking about how some of the folks didn't get to see her, and things that didn't get done that we planned to get done, and how she wanted to go fishing one more time or something like that. And then I'd have grief with that. It didn't take down, though, the relief that I felt, like watching this body break down and the skin break down, and the pain and the efforting to turn her, and how dependent she felt, which was not how she wanted to be. So it was both and then most of us can't say, I felt relieved when somebody died, because we're so ashamed of it. Like, oh my God, how cold-hearted are you? Oh my God, you're like one cousin away from the devil, to be somebody died, instead of like, well, you didn't walk in her shoes. You didn't walk in my shoes with her. So you couldn't possibly comprehend why I may feel relief at somebody's death, or even with a pet. And even with my baby brother, who was just 40, who died of a massive heart attack. He was, according to the coroner and the funeral director, dead before he didn't even feel his own head hit the floor. And my first thought, and this was the person I loved more than any other human being that I know of. And there was the shock of that. And I still had some sense of he's free. Free. Because he had had a very, very interesting time and trying to fit in to a place he didn't fit in. So as much as there was shock and grief and loss, and my baby brother dead, there was also some awareness that he's free. And yes, PJ, I think it would look like, oh my God, you're schizophrenic. It's like, well, I feel about everything there is to be felt all at once. And I'm going to have a little easier time of it if I don't call it bad and negative, calling me or shaming myself because of the experience I'm having. So I'm here tonight, last month, I believe, with you all. And what I put in there was something I'd written today in the newsletter that's coming out. And if you want the whole thing, go to marthacreek.com and just enroll for the newsletter. It comes out once a month, and it is that our mind has access only to what it has learned. It cannot use what it doesn't know. So if we don't get in there and see what have we stored in the mind, what belief systems are we running, what neural pathways are, the tracks here, then we're stuck in that, versus accepting that the others, the people around us still today, including us, are ill prepared to help us deal with losses, because they had inherited, most of them, what they passed down to us, which is drink it away, shop it away, deny it, suck it up, don't cry, be strong, keep a stiff upper lip, like all of this that was handed down like that. And we believe then, if in our unconscious, if we don't look at this, that what we already know is the right way to go about this, until we see it's not the right way for me. It's not the right way for me. My spirit can't bear this. Like, and for me, like I said today in one of the ministers groups, like these awakenings, things that knock me off my chair when I'm at a funeral for a child and hear the minister pray the prayer for protection and then close it with, and all is well, as that baby is lowered down into a grave. Now, in the absolute, all may be well in the divine, but back here in the humanness of us and the heartbreak of the humanness of us, I don't know anybody that wants to hear it's all good or all as well as they watch the baby go down. And maybe there's somebody that needs to hear that. I don't know, but it wasn't me that day. And on behalf of the family, if we can accept the simple premise that we've been practicing and are therefore habituated in some incorrect ideas, incorrect ways, then that can allow us to begin practicing a new way of being with feelings, a new way of being with loss, a new way of being with our humanness, a new way of being with brokenheartedness, a new way of being with the loss of familiar, of family, of relationships, of health, of wealth, of everything under the sun, and therefore begin to put a new way of being into place, which is my most devoted, sincere prayer, to be a new way, to be the new way of being, and not to hand down to the next generation what's been handed down. And herein lies a very different result field. So big, deep breath, everybody. Roseanne, your hand was up, honey. Did you take it down or did you change your mind?
I didn't want to interrupt the flow.
All right.
I just wanted to say that it might be the only place that I could say what I'm about to say with allowing the mixture of every emotion, that when I was standing over my son's body, there was a relief that he was no longer suffering with heroin addiction. It was one of the feelings amidst, of course, thousands of other feelings. But I just wanted to say that this might be the perfect place. I thank you so much, Jerry and Martha, but that it is okay to have that feeling. That would not flippantly say that just to anyone, but I think right here, right now, you could receive it. That one of the feelings I had was, oh, thank God, there's no more jail for Nicholas Paul, and there's no more heroin. And I just wanted to show you his picture real quick.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. And honey, I didn't get to meet him except through you, which was lovely. And he made it clear that he wanted out of here, and it's like we kept Narcaning him, and
Yeah, I had a better plan.
we had a better plan for him. Yeah. So he finally got it his way. And thank you for giving voice, honey, to your own relief. And people that can't understand that, honey, well, they can't comprehend it. Like they don't have any experience that would be coherent. That no experience in their life yet would be congruent with saying, I actually had relief when somebody passed. And until they have their own trip through it, or maybe not, that may not be what their path is about, then we don't have to be concerned with them with them being coherent with how we're feeling. Yeah, so those of you that can keep crying, do so. So PJ put a question in about how do you have a conversation with someone who says, yes, let's talk, and then they won't. And I think, I can't remember if it was last year or not, that I was called a woman's daughter, 20-some-year-old daughter, that on one of our very first trips had gone to Florida, and she was swimming and she was killed by an alligator. And she came to me because she'd been everywhere else and didn't know where to go. And a mutual friend said, you need to go to Martha. So she came to me and she talked for 1 hour consecutively without stopping, without even much of a breath. And then I had to say, I have to stop here regretfully to stay on a schedule and for the people that are waiting for me now. And she said, you never said a word, did you? And I said, I didn't. And she said, it was just what I needed, was for somebody not to say a word. So who knows what they need? And if they won't talk, they won't talk. And I remember my friend Anne, who had a baby as a young girl and was sent away to have the baby. And when the baby was born, she promised the baby, as soon as you turn 18, I will find you. And off went her baby. And she told me this story one day when I got to her house. And she said, I've never told someone this story. And I said, well, thank you for telling me. And she said, when there's a listener, there's a lot to tell. When there's a listener, there's a lot to tell. So who knows? Who knows what listening can do? I want to put you over in a group tonight. It's your choice to do that. Some of you may know each other. And I'd love the group. We'll just do this for 5 or 6 minutes. And I'd love you to say hi and then get right to how have you done it? I asked you to think about this a few weeks ago. How have you done it? How have you navigated the losses you've had? What's been effective for you? What's been helpful? What's been beneficial? It's not advice giving. Nobody may take it. Hopefully it'll be helpful for you to renew your own resilience and equip yourself. And then just share, do your best to let everybody talk. And then I'll send out a little message and get us all back into this big room. So the idea is for you to get some support here, maybe a new way of being with these losses, and then at least look into the eyes of somebody that you know for sure has a glimpse of what heartbreak is and what loss is. We'll come back together in just a few minutes. If you want to join the group, just click it on your screen that you accept join.
Martha, it's Candace.
Hi, honey.
Have you assigned the groups? I didn't get one. I'm on my iPhone, so it's a little different for me.
Yeah, I wouldn't assign honey without knowing who you are.
Oh, okay.
There you go, honey.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Martha. Hey, Martha.
Yes, honey.
I'm on mute. I unmuted myself. I'm on my phone.
Busy and not doing it to bypass feelings like I did when I was younger. Not as willing to do that anymore. And even that, so I told some of you, I watched a movie every single day that were tearjerker, purposeful prompts for me to cry, listening to music that would cause me to cry, photographs, picture books, anything that would insist, that would be purposeful in the crying that I felt like I had to do.
And I think that provoking actions that provoke, like the music or the movies, gets us out of the denial that I'm unhappy, I'm sad, I'm heartbroken, and forces us to confront it, because it is easy to stay busy.
Yeah, at least to include it, honey. Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. I love you so much. I love y'all got to see some of people that you know and can connect with that way. I've also wanted to introduce and I'll come to you in a minute, Laura. Kathleen Flynn, can you wave, honey? And say hi to everybody. She's down there on my screen at the bottom. So come up and speak. So Kathleen will be presenting next week. And she's got a great deal of experience, a lot of resourcing, a lot of resourceful about it. So be sure to come back next week to get bolstered up again. And anything you want to say, Kathleen, about that, honey? What's coming?
Listening tonight, and I'm so glad to be with you. And I've listened to the others after the fact. Boy, the work that's being done here is amazing. And there's some things we'll talk about next week that I think a lot of experience has taught me. And I want to hear more. I think next week we might like to do a group again. In fact, one of our people didn't get a chance to speak. So
yeah,
okay.
It went really quick.
Yeah.
We also David Roth coming next week. Some of you know him and his music, David Roth. So volunteer to do a couple pieces of music for us, so you can look forward to that. It's officially time to close. I'll stop the recording. Laura, go ahead. And if you can stay around, I will too. And if you've got questions, anyway, I can support you. And I acknowledge, Elizabeth, you put a question forward that we didn't get to. And I hope you understand that, honey, or we'll put it in the chat, or maybe somebody can follow up if you've got ideas about grieving, having to go back to work, not ready to go back to work, not wanting to go back to work, having to get a job. I don't want a job. I like not having a job. Damn, I got to have a job. I think that would be a similar flavor of that. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge Kelly. Wanted to let you know that I see you and I hear you.